Hey everyone, April here, and we are on a witchful journey. So, I know that Yule has already begun, and the winter solstice passed us by. I had considered releasing this episode early, but some things came up in between the release of my last episode and today, so here we are. But since I promised a Yule episode, we're going to continue with that and talk a bit about Yule. Now, there's a lot of history there, but we're only going to touch on that a little bit today. As I said in an earlier episode, we're covering the Wheel of the Year as it's celebrated in Wicca first, because that's the cycle of festivals that most people are familiar with, at least here in the US. As many of you know, Yule is a winter festival that is primarily celebrated on the winter solstice, which was yesterday, December 21st. The exact time of the winter solstice depends on where you're located, so for where I am, it was 10:03 a.m. Some people care about exact timing, others don't. But the Yule season is generally celebrated from the winter solstice until the 1st of January. But Yule is way more than just recognition of the winter solstice. Even though it's interchangeably called the winter solstice, Yule also goes by other names as well. Midwinter, Yuletide, Yulefest, Saturnalia, Alban Arthen, and some use it interchangeably with Christmas. Historically, Yule was observed primarily by the Germanic peoples, which were tribal groups living in Northern Europe. It's one of the oldest winter solstice festivals. The winter solstice's significance has been recognized for thousands of years, since the winter solstice marks the shortest day and the longest night of the year in the Northern Hemisphere. There are many ancient cultures that held festivals at this time, but the one called Yule seems to have origins among the ancient Norse. In Old Norse, there's a word, Yule, which is an event mentioned numerous times in the corpus and is said to take place over the course of 3 days. We can dig further into that another time when we begin really digging into Norse paganism and its mythology. But this appears to be primarily where the Old English word for Yule comes from. Yule was first attested in the early history of the Germanic peoples in a Gothic language calendar, sometime around the 5th or 6th century CE, appearing in a month's name. Yola was the word for Yule itself, which we'll later see isn't so much just a one-day festival, it takes place over the course of 12 days. Then we have Arayola, which refers to before Yule, and seems to indicate the month of December. And then Afterayola, which refers to after Yule, and seems to indicate the month of January. In the 8th century, the Venerable Bede, who we've talked a little bit about before, wrote that the Anglo-Saxon calendar had a word, Yule, that corresponded to December, or meant December and January. He wrote that it appeared that the word indicated a passage of time, and was the 2-month period where the sunlight began to increase again. Yule also has deep ties to the wild hunt of ancient Norse mythology and traditions. I'm looking forward to exploring that with you, but we're going to put a pin on that one for later. Now, you've probably heard that Yule was the original Christmas. The reason for that is because early Christian leaders saw the practices of the indigenous pagan traditions and recognized that it may be difficult to convert these practitioners. They decided that it would be much easier to get those people to convert to Christianity if the celebration of Jesus' birth was taking place at about the same time. So they aligned the holidays and festivals and even adopted some of the traditions. Around the 9th century, they started using Yule and Christmas interchangeably as Christianity spread, so that potential converts would find it more digestible. In the saga of King Håkon Haraldsson of Norway, the Norse king Håkon the Good, it says that he was converted to Christianity, and in a nutshell, he turned around and merged Yule and Christmas during his reign, The saga says that he made it a law that everyone had to brew ale, feast, and celebrate all around the same time as this newly merged holiday, or they would have to pay fines. Drinking copious amounts of alcohol was mandatory, probably one of the few times that you could get in trouble for not getting drunk. He allowed some of the Yule traditions to continue in order to appease his subjects, and that ended up being key to laying the foundation of Christmas as we know it today. Yule, or Yule, wasn't a term that was used in England until the 11th century, which coincides with the arrival of the Danish to England and, if you're familiar with your history, the Danish conquest. So, to try to lessen any confusion here, because I'll be honest, when I first started learning all of this as a teenager, 20 some odd years ago, it started to confuse me, and information wasn't quite so accessible. The early Danish word and the Old Norse word are the same, despite the Danish being from Denmark and the Norse being from Norway. They're related, or connected. Yuletide first began being used to describe the festival season, or the time frame in which the celebrations occurred, sometime in the 15th century. The tide in Yuletide derives from the Old English word tid, which was the word for time, or hour. So if we were 15th century England talking about the holiday season, we probably would be pronouncing it Yuletide. In terms of Wicca, Yule is considered the second Sabbath of the Wheel of the Year by some, while others view it as the final festival of the year. It's generally celebrated on the winter solstice as the rebirth of the Great Horned God, which celebrates the return of the sun. The days begin to grow in length as the infant horned god gets older and grows in power. The goddess, who has just given birth, at this time represents the earth. She's still and resting. Some Wiccans lean more toward the battle between the Holly King and the Oak King, and even do reenactments of the battle. In this case, the two kings actually represent the dual aspects of the horned god. Either way, Yule is celebrated by many Wiccans and Neo-Pagans alike. The specific rituals and length of celebrations vary, but they are all geared toward welcoming the return of the sun. The themes for the season are rebirth, quiet introspection, beginning a new year, hope, setting intentions, and the celebration of light. Feasting, fires, and lights of all kinds are common during this time. It's also one of those liminal periods that we've talked about previously, and some historians think that sacrifices were historically an important part of the festival. These sacrifices were thought to be made either to the gods and goddesses and other supernatural beings, or to the dead, possibly both. You're familiar with leaving milk and cookies out for Santa, right? Where do you think that came from? I'll tell you right now, it didn't stem from mom and dad just wanting a snack after you went to bed. Those are examples of food offerings that would be set out overnight, though it was more likely that it was mead or ale and whatever meat they had cooked for the feast, and possibly some form of sweets. There are a number of other things that you may associate with Christmas that actually have far older origins, and are still incorporated into the celebrations of Yule today. Let's start with candles. Everyone loves candles. The colors associated with Yule are red, green, gold, and white. Candles represent the triumph of light over darkness, and the rekindling of hope as the sun's strength begins to increase. I took the time to dig through my stash of candles, because I happen to have a whole box of random candles. Don't question it. And I set up a bunch of white tea light candles, and some green mini taper ones, and some red votive candles that smell like spiced something. Apple, maybe? The red symbolizes the return of the sun's power, life force, vitality, passion, and warmth. It echoes the red berries of the holly sprigs. It represents the fiery inner spirit during the cold winter months. The green symbolizes growth, the persistence of the evergreens, prosperity, abundance, fertility, and renewal. It reminds us that not all is lost. As the earth begins to awaken again after her slumber, a new cycle begins. The gold symbolizes solar energy, success, power, joy, wealth, confidence, clarity, and illumination. It's central to all Yule candle magic because it represents the sun itself. The white symbolizes purity, peace, spiritual light, and protection. It's a reminder to clean the slate and start anew. This is another color that is pretty central to candle magic in general. Not sure what to do with your candles? Try candlelight meditation. Create a sacred space using your candles. I like the white tea candles to create a circle, with one red and one green inside the circle with me. Sit and reflect on what you'd like to achieve in the next year. Visualize your desires, your hopes, your dreams, and your goals all being reached in the coming year. You can also place your candles on your altar to light in the evenings throughout Yule. This can even involve a candle lighting ceremony or ritual. One way to do this is by turning off all of your lights and placing a sun candle, which can be any candle that you designate as the sun. It can be gold, yellow, or even white, as long as it's placed in the center of the space that you're working on, and then placing a bunch of candles around it. They don't have to be arranged in any specific manner, and don't light them yet. Face your candles and say, "The wheel of the year has turned once more, and the nights have grown longer and colder. Tonight, the darkness begins to retreat, and the light begins to return once again. As the wheel continues to spin, the sun returns to us once more." And then light your sun candle and say, "Even in the darkest hours, even in the longest nights, the spark of life lingered on, laying dormant, waiting, ready to return. When the time was right, the darkness will leave us now as the sun begins its journey home." Begin lighting the rest of the candles, starting with the one closest to the sun candle, and work your way outward. Or if you placed them in a circle, start with the candle at the topmost spot of the circle to represent the beginning of the return of the sun, and work your way clockwise, and say, "As the wheel turns, light returns. The light of the sun has returned to us, bringing life and warmth with it. The shadows will vanish and life will continue. We are blessed by the light of the sun." And then take some time to consider what the return of the sun means to you. How does it affect you, your family, the world around you? You can leave the candles to extinguish themselves if you plan to sit there and keep an eye on them. Fire safety, after all. Or you can turn your lights back on and extinguish the candles in kind of the reverse order that you lit them, leaving the sun candle for last. This is also a good time to do a prosperity spell. For this, you'll want a green candle, coins, basil and cinnamon, citrine or pyrite, and a pen and paper. Write your prosperity goals for the coming year on the paper, and then fold it toward you 3 times. Place your paper under the green candle and arrange your coins, basil, and cinnamon around the base of the candle. Place your crystal or crystals nearby. As you light the candle, recite, "Green like growth, green like gold, prosperity and wealth I hold. As evergreens persist through cold, my abundance grows, my fortune bold. Seeds planted now will grow and thrive. Prosperity flows. I am alive." Let the candle extinguish itself if it's safe to do so. And then keep your coins and crystal on your altar or in a safe place through the Yule season. A Yule feast is another tradition that is similar to current Christmas traditions, as the feast originated with Yule. A Yule feast consists of seasonal foods, like root veggies, hearty stews, spiced cider, roasted meats, mulled wine, and some sweets. Generally, along with the feast, there are blessings, toasts that are made, and expressions of gratitude for the abundance that made the meal possible. A Yule log is also quite common among practitioners, though the interpretation and execution of a Yule log has changed in some cases due to our ever-changing world. Originally, the Yule log was a large log or part of a tree that would be burned throughout the entire multi-day festival, sometimes lasting up to 12 days. The log is traditionally burned in the hearth or in a bonfire. This practice is still pretty popular in Europe today. The Yule log serves as a focal point for meditation, reflection, and manifestation of hopes and dreams for the coming year. It also signifies the return of the light from the sun. It's usually oak to represent endurance and luck, but ash, birch, and cherry are also popular depending on the region. If you don't have access to those, you can use maple or walnut. Often, the Yule log is decorated, lit ceremoniously, and kept burning through the night or the season, with a small portion of the log being saved to light the following year's fire. A popular modern take on the Yule log is the roulade style, or Swiss roll style, cake with the same name. Sometimes it's referred to as bûche de Noël, which is French for Yule log. The cake is traditionally a tender chocolate sponge cake, filled with mascarpone whipped cream and covered in whipped chocolate ganache. The whipped ganache is often scored to resemble the bark of a log. They're delicious when made from scratch, by the way. Whichever take on the Yule log you decide to go with, it symbolizes warmth, light, and blessings to the home. Decorations like garlands, evergreens, holly, and so on are all used for Yule decorations. If decorating your altar or your home, evergreen boughs from cedar, pine, fir, hemlock, or spruce, they're used to represent everlasting life, resilience, the enduring power of nature, hope, and rebirth. They can be made into garlands, wreaths, use the branches on your altar, or even just bring the whole damn tree into the house. Yeah. Evergreen trees were part of Yule before they began being called Christmas trees, which was something that the German Christians in the 16th century started, bringing the trees indoors to decorate. So, just because you'd rather celebrate Yule over Christmas doesn't mean that you have to ditch the tree if it's something that you really enjoy having in your home. Just please try to be eco-friendly about it. People have actually begun to be really creative when it comes to the trees. In some places, you can actually rent the tree, which is potted, and at the end of the season, bring it back so that it can continue to grow and eventually be planted. There are also plenty of things that you can do with a cut tree at the end of the season. Some people will happily take the tree with branches trimmed off so it can dry completely and be cut and carved for other purposes. When decorating your evergreen tree or adding to the boughs used in other areas of your home, you can use pine cones, dried herbs and fruits, berries, holly, mistletoe, ivy, and handmade ornaments. The addition of strings of light signifies the return of the sun. Some traditions include apples hung from the branches as a reminder of the eventual return of spring. And that just triggered a memory of decorating our tree with little plastic apples at some point in my past. Anyway, holly. That plant with the vibrant green leaves that are spiked, and it boasts a cluster of equally vibrant red berries. Holly represents protection, resilience, vitality, the eternal cycle of life, and the battle between the darkness and light through the figures of the Holly King and the Oak King. Holly has been a significant part of Yule for thousands of years, often used to ward off spirits and lightning strikes, invite good fortune, and remind us to have hope for the return of spring. It's also used to represent the masculine aspect in pagan traditions, especially when it's paired with the feminine ivy. And ivy, another significant plant during the Yule season, represents strength, determination, rebirth, and the divine feminine. It represents the goddess and Mother Earth. Garlands are often made using evergreen boughs, holly, and ivy, and sometimes the vines are used to weave bracelets, necklaces, and crowns for the Yule season. And then there's mistletoe, the third significant plant during the Yule season. Its magical properties come from the belief that it exists between two worlds, the earth and the sky, because this is a hemiparasitic plant. It pulls energy from its host while also creating its own energy, and it doesn't use soil or the ground to grow. Its berries in the moonlight also appear to glow, which makes it even more mystical. It's also the most well-known of the three significant plants outside of the evergreen trees. Mistletoe represents love, fertility, peace, goodwill, and the continuation of life through the winter solstice. It was hung in doorways and from ceilings to ward off evil, bless homes, and for some fertility rites that were conducted beneath it, which is where kissing under the mistletoe comes from. It was often used historically as a cure for infertility and as an aphrodisiac. Side note, though, it's actually quite toxic, so please don't ingest it. Reindeer are often associated with the season, and not just because they pull Santa's sleigh in the Christmas traditions. Part of the reason that reindeer are so deeply ingrained in the stories of Yule, which bled into the stories of Christmas, is because those stories we hear today are based on much older stories, ones that come from northern places where reindeer are native. Fun fact, in North America, the same animal is called a caribou. Reindeer represent the wild energy of the season, strength, endurance, and the ability to navigate through darkness. It appears that they are, and always have been, revered as sacred animals. They're seen as spiritual guides, with deep ties to spirits, gods, and the northern lights. The Yule goat is one that is seen more often in places like Sweden, but I have seen a bit here and there in the US as well. The Yule goat is a large goat constructed out of straw. It's thought that perhaps these giant creations were tributes to Thor, who had two goats that would pull his chariot through the sky. Today they tend to be much smaller, and are used as ornaments on the tree, and commonly wrapped with red ribbon. However, if you're in one of the modern-day Nordic countries, you may see giant versions of the Yule goat displayed in towns and cities during Yule. Unfortunately, these large straw goats have attracted vandalism in the past, resulting in more creative ways to use them in celebration. One of those being a ceremonial burning of the large straw figures. Snowflakes, of course, are a large part of the Yule season. They represent the beauty of winter, individual uniqueness, and the rebirth of light, since enough of them can reflect and magnify even the tiniest bit of light. Snowflakes are associated with affection and creation, since one of the legends is that Demeter, heartbroken over her daughter being brought to the underworld, allows for winter to reign over the land, and her tears turn to snowflakes in the cold. If you're looking for a fun little craft project to do with your family, especially if you have kids, making paper snowflake decorations is a super fun idea. You can even make it a festive little party by having baked treats available as snacks, make some hot cocoa, and have your kids invite a few friends over. Just make sure you have enough paper to go around. If you want to do this but are on the fence about the amount of quote-unquote wasted paper, you can absolutely upcycle some old books that you own, or even invite others to bring some books that they want to upcycle for the project. Just, if you're going to have kids involved in this craft project and you're upcycling books, just be mindful of the spice level of the book contents. Just saying. Sun symbols are key to Yule celebrations since you're welcoming the return of the sun. These can be handmade sun wheels like the one we made for Letha. It can be colored cloth, candles, ribbons, etc. that are gold, yellow, or orange. Or you can use dried orange slices in your decorations. Any of the sun and solar symbols can be used to represent the return of the sun, the lengthening of days, and the promise of renewed energy. Other ways to celebrate that involve the sun or solar representatives can include a bonfire with friends or family. Make sure to bundle up and bring some hot drinks, whether they're alcoholic or not. You can also greet the sunrise by going out into a quiet spot in nature where you'll be able to see the sunrise. Make sure you bundle up for that too. And offer prayers and/or intentions for the new cycle and the coming year. Some folks are fortunate enough to be able to attend the large gatherings at major solar sites like Stonehenge and Newgrange. I would love to be able to visit one of them and witness a sunrise. The exchanging of gifts is probably the best known part of the Yule season, especially with Christmas being tied into the season and how commercialized Christmas is in our modern world. I'm not here to tell you that you have to exchange gifts. I'm also not here to tell you that you shouldn't exchange gifts. The exchanging of gifts, though, is the spirit of generosity and sharing. And Yule is definitely a perfect time for expressing love and gratitude for loved ones. The main difference, at least in my opinion, is that gift giving within Yule is much more personal and tends to carry a lot more meaning. The gifts are more thoughtful. They're often handmade or nature-based. Sometimes they're more practical and are often things like handmade soap, jams, jellies, lotions, extracts, handmade notebooks, a crocheted or knitted piece, handcrafted jewelry, candles, the list goes on. Yule is a relatively quiet indoor holiday compared to most of the other festivals throughout the year, and there are plenty of ways that you can celebrate the season. You can stay indoors and bake tasty treats. You can meditate on the death and rebirth of the sun. You can dive into some divination practices, or host a drumming and chanting circle around a bonfire. You can honor the deities that are associated with the season, such as the horned god in his infant phase, the goddess in her crone phase, Odin, the green man, Demeter, Apollo, the oak king, just to name a few. Don't worry, we'll end up talking about all of them eventually. You can take time to review the past year, assess the personal growth that you've achieved, and set intentions and goals for the coming year. Kind of sounds like New Year's resolutions, doesn't it? You can also journal, which is something that I really need to do because I haven't done that in a while. So, you can take some time to meditate on shedding old patterns and releasing the ones that no longer serve you. You can bundle up and go on a nature walk. Reflect on the beauty of the season, even if you don't like the cold, and maybe even leave some eco-friendly offerings. You can find an open pine cone, get a pen and some paper, and probably cut the paper into smaller pieces because you'll need to roll them up. But you'll want to write down your intentions, goals, and dreams for the year, one for each strip of paper, and roll each one up, placing them in between the scales of the pine cone. Place the pine cone on your altar until the end of the Yule season, at which point you'll burn it somewhere fire safe. You can also do a releasing ceremony, where you write down all of the negative thoughts, patterns, or emotions that you wish to release from yourself. Fold the paper away from you 3 times, and burn the paper, visualizing the energies being released, transformed, and given to nature to deal with. Affirm that you are ready to replace those things with positive changes. I know I definitely didn't cover absolutely everything today, which does bother me a bit if I'm being honest, but hopefully you'll get the info that you were looking for, and will join me again to continue learning. Thanks so much for tuning in and hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss out on future episodes, hit those like and follow buttons. In 2 weeks' time, we'll talk a bit about some Scottish folk magic. I can't wait to share it with you. In the meantime, you can find me on Facebook, Witchful Journey Podcast, on Instagram at @a_witchful_journey, on BlueSky at awitchfuljourney.bsky.social, and on YouTube, A Witchful Journey. I enjoy hearing from listeners, so if you pop in, say hi, leave me a rating, or if you're really feeling it, a review. If you feel called to contribute, donate, or buy my next podcast coffee, whatever you want to call it, check out A Witchful Journey on ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com. You can also send stories and experiences to awitchfuljourney@gmail.com. I'm April, and we are on a witchful journey.